Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to GeekWatch, a subsidiary of the Monastery, the open bar of the internet. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me I have two of my good brothers here in the temple. We have in the red corner our resident waifu hunter and man who knows way too much about rings and running shoes. We're not running that game. Good brother Akira.
It's important to know when waifu hunting with the Kirakus that you always look for the balloons in the front and the cake in the back, looking like a full-on birthday party. Also, fuck SAO.
We have the man of 1,000 runes, the CEO of Zadari Enterprises, and the bane of my fucking existence, good brother Xanatrix.
Zadari Enterprises would like to remind you that eventually I'm going to destroy all of the localizers that try to change cultural behaviors in the things they are localizing. We're opening our own localization branch. It's called Localization Hunting. And it's hunting season.
Is that like how with certain places there's no off season for hog hunting?
Yes.
Yeah.
And even worse, I think in some places in the U.S., the government will actually pay you for taking out wild hogs.
Indeed.
For those who don't know, for those who think that might be excessive or might result in overhunting, wild hogs in certain parts of the U.S. are a bit of a problem because, one, they're an invasive species, two, they tear through everything, and three, they breed like, well, pigs. If you want to see another example of how invasive species can really wreck an environment, look at the rabbit problem that happened in Australia a long-ass time ago. Or hell, Coops, I'm pretty sure in some of the wetlands over there, there's certain animals you have to keep an eye out for and try and get rid of if you see them.
Yeah, there are a couple. Most of it's the snakes aren't, and it doesn't get crazier until you reach Florida.
Mm-hmm. Over here, there's like zebra mussels and milkweed. You are legally required to clear your boat of them if you find them. Because they've been a problem for as long as I've been alive. But we're not here to talk about invasive species. Because I'm unfortunately not classy enough to be something like Minnesota bound. And how's that for a deep cut, Zan?
I hate you.
Oh, how could you not love Raven? Not
I
that one,
know.
Coops.
I know. I am just saying deep cut when I'm already covered in cuts today, Monk.
Yeah. But so we've talked a fair bit about how card games are serious business on this series. In fact, when Takahashi passed away, we did an entire episode dedicated to him. Uh, and it's certainly something I'm no stranger to, especially given the time frames that we all grew up. And recently, I've been diving into a game called Perfect Draw, which is trying to do something that I was trying to do for the longest time. Because I love me some Yu-Gi-Oh. I even loved me some Chaotic back in the day. Mostly the card game itself. I never watched the show, but there were plenty of those anime card games in the early 2000s that I ate the fuck up. Some more than others, and some were a case where I wanted to play more of them, but there was too much clutter. Looking at you, DBZ. I love you, but you were really hard to set up on lunch tables, so you got lower priority. Especially since you needed the scouter and the warrior sword and all that.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed, I think that's part of the reason why Yu-Gi-Oh took off the way it did, because a smaller set of zones means you could set that up just about anywhere. But there had been plenty of card game anime over the years, or stuff that is in that vein. And some may say that the idea of a children's card game being treated that serious is ridiculous. To that I say, is it any more ridiculous than treating I don't know, Go as a serious thing, or any
Or
or
Beyblade.
let's not. Everybody forgets that Beyblade is loosely based on the Bayama game that is very popular in parts of Japan. Uh, but the point is that if you're getting on any form of animation about ridiculousness, you need to get your eyes checked. And this particular concept has been a well-worn concept in various forms over the last 30 or so years. And with the recent development of the Perfect Draw TTRPG, as well as our buddy Vincent's project Banishment and stuff like Millennium Blades, I figured this is as good a time as any to explore this concept in a version of building the equation. Thus we come to the present form. Now, despite the names that you see on the splash screen, we're not trying to build anything that is meant to be like one of these. The idea of building the equation is taking our own spin on a particular motif. When we built Agito, what would become Agito Arcanum, that was built on a hero school motif.
What does an adventurer's guild actually do? Was the question we asked.
Mm-hmm.
And if they do it that way, how would they do it?
The Symposium of Life experiment was built on the motif of secret guardians, i.e., building a shonen battle manga centered around an organization that hunts a particular monster that's hidden from the public. That's how these kind of things start out. It is us asking and answering a question and then seeing where we go from there. That's the key difference. And this means that with the idea of a card game anime, and I do want to note for anybody who's like, why is Bakugan on this? The idea of card game anime does not necessarily have to be limited to to games using cards exclusively. But rather, it is a subdivision of shonen battle manga that focuses on some sort of collectible game. And I think that's a distinction that needs to be made. So even something as ridiculous as, say, Capsule Monster Chess or that Dice Monsters game, those would still count under this in terms of this broad genre. It's just that the majority of them use cards, so that's where the name ends up coming from.
Well, the majority of them use cards because cards have been a collectible of a type for a long time too.
Mm-hmm. And let's not forget that before Nintendo got into video games, they were a card manufacturing company.
Hanafuda, yes.
Mm-hmm. And Hanafuda cards have existed for centuries.
Centuries.
There are also some very interesting games you can play with Hanafuda.
Mm-hmm. And
Card game about fucking plants.
Yeah. Oh. There's been some card games that have had a in-universe explanation that it started out as a game that was played with some form of divination deck because, well, cards were used for some forms of divination over the centuries. Obviously, the most popular example of this is tarot, but there's others. And even with tarot divining, there's a bunch of different variations of it.
The Oracle decks.
Mm-hmm. Along with that particular variant that is credited to Aleister Crowley, but I always find it funny that he was called the wickedest man in England when he was just a rich guy high on everything.
Mm-hmm.
Like everybody looks at him as if
A
he was
rich guy, high on everything, having lots of orgies.
Yeah.
It was the orgies that made him the wickedest man.
Mm-hmm.
Both women who couldn't get laid at his orgies and men who couldn't get into his orgies started calling him wicked because, well, they couldn't get to the orgies.
Would that make
Gotta
him
love jealousy.
Mm-hmm. I guess that would make him the original Ho Train.
I am not going to dignify that with a response.
Nope.
But the thing of it is, there's quite a few varieties on how this kind of thing can be done. And one thing that I talked about before we went live is how a lot of people have a kind of, for lack of a better term, misinterpretation of the way to utilize cards and the way to utilize the card game aspect if they were to run a campaign that's loosely inspired by, say, Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Vanguard or what have you. If you look at those particular shows, the card game is a means to an end.
Yep, it's a vehicle for conflict resolution rather than being the conflict itself.
And I would, which is why the whole, I treat the whole the anime is about the card game with the same amount of disdain as I do who say that a mecha anime is about the mech.
I have Monk, I have to jump in here. You've invoked the mecha trap card.
That was all according to Keikaku.
Of course it was all according to Keikaku. We love cake around here. What are you talking about?
As long as it ain't chocolate.
I actually have a really good yellow cake you might like. But regardless, mecha saying that the mecha show is about the mech is not even wrong, as we love to quote around here. Thank you, Wolfgang Polly.
Mm-hmm.
Of course the mecha show's about the mech, you fucking idiots. But that's not what that means. Mecha shows, in and of themselves, tend to be some of the greatest character plays ever made. People are like, oh, I like this mecha show because it's about the characters. Every mecha show is about the characters and the interplay between them. Every mecha show has that. And in many mecha shows, the mecha itself is a character. Whether it has an actual, sentience and sapience to it and thus can interact with the cast in that way, or whether it's a character through the way it influences the people around it, such as, say, the Avas technically have a sapience to them, but only while somebody's inside them. But just the fact that the Avas exist and the things that they represent make them characters. On top of that, look at the Gundams. Look at any Gundam. Any show that has the name Gundam on it. Even some of the lesser ones like IBO. I can't wait to hear the screams from that one. The Gundams themselves are not sentient. They're not sapient. People would not say that a Gundam is a character, but it absolutely is. Because it influences the people around it in ways other than someone is piloting it to do combat. Because of the symbology behind it. So yes, the mecha show is about the fucking mech. Obviously. But it's much more about the interplay of people. Which is why mecha shows are also some of the most... I don't care whether you're watching the original Mobile Suit Gundam and going, holy shit, that's terrible and tragic. No, there's plenty of hope in Gundam. Even if you're looking at something like Ideon, where everybody dies at the end, there's still a lot of hope there.
Since you brought that up, let me use Gundam as an example of a case where saying about the mecha is missing the point. Since a lot of times when people are doing that, they're trying to go with the implication of it's a glorified toy commercial, probably because they grew up in the 80s where everything was a glorified toy commercial. And that's not to say that isn't the case, but as I talked about in our discussion on mecha history a few weeks ago, more often than not, a lot of anime, especially as we get closer to the 80s, were glorified music commercials. Because that's where the money was really coming in from, was from record deals, not from toy deals.
Well, not only that, but the glorification for toys or music may have been a driving force for the creation of the show, but it sure as fuck wasn't the driving force of the show itself.
Yeah. Now that being said, I'll use Gundam as an example of this. There's very much a depiction of the Federation being on the back foot up until that point in the 1 Year War, with not only Grandpa Gundam but White Base, Gun Tank, and Gun Cannon being seen as the secret weapon, not necessarily a secret weapon, but the X factor that could potentially turn the tide. Since the big advantage that Zeon has in that story is not only having mobile suits, but having a variety of them for different theaters.
Mm.
And yes, later on there's a dependence on wonder weapons, which helps with the Germany analog that is kind of going for, along with the politics. The Big Zom was a wonder weapon. Let's not kid ourselves. It was the equivalent
most
of the
mobile
King
armors
Tiger.
were.
It was the equivalent of the King Tiger.
Yeah, most mobile weapons were most mobile armors.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, of course, there's a part where, where Zabi himself warns Giren not to become like Hitler. He literally references Hitler.
Yeah, but the point is that someone like Amuro is essentially doing the hero's journey of a sense, not a 1-to-1, but being pulled out of the comfort zone that he's in when it comes to being the pilot of the Gundam.
Remember
And
that Bright has reformed every pilot he's ever fucking slapped.
now to shift that into something like Yu-Gi-Oh, the journey of Yugi Moto, what pulls him out of the comfortable position that he's in, is Atem, even if we didn't know him as such early on, and that symbiotic relationship of Atem is who more or less is acting as his mentor. And if you're going to use the hero's journey analog,
More or less is acting as a psychopath before the card games get involved.
yeah, though. Look, season 0 of Yu-Gi-Oh is a whole other beast to cover. But I think you see
I
the
want to
point
play
of getting
air hockey. I want to play air hockey with a puck made of ice on top of a griddle pan with nitroglycerin in the center of it. That's totally a good game for everybody to play.
But let's not some all of the you could do a whole episode just talking about all of the penalty games from season 0 and from that first run of the manga.
That's easy. I choose my finger. I choose my thumb. All of a sudden, man burns to death.
Mm-hmm. But the other the point is that it is that you have that same journey. It's just that the card game is a medium for that. Especially, and not only his journey, but everyone else's. Everyone more or less changed throughout that story. Especially folks like Joey and Kaiba, or Jonoichi if you want to be a purist. The point is that focusing on the card game itself in developing whether it be a card game anime or TTRPG or whatnot is seeing the forest for the trees, and it's something that a lot of people hyper focused on. If some of the responses I saw to the Perfect Draw interview I did recently are any indication.
The proverb you were going for was missing the forest for the trees, but yes, it's missing the point.
Mm-hmm. I mean, imagine saying that Remember the Titans is all
about football.
Yeah.
I mean, it is. Yes, on the surface, it absolutely is about football. It's not about football only. It's even about football as a focus.
And if I had to use a similar example, not too long ago, I ended up binging through the Drive to Survive series on Netflix, which dedicated like 2 seasons of it to Haas, which is the only American, at least American funded Formula One team. And this was during Haas's low point, where they were very much on the back foot for various reasons and were the bottom feeder of Formula One.
Mm.
And because of that it's doing kind of an underdog story where you think that they're going to get at least some wins, some points, and then it's taken out from that the 11th hour. And going through all the struggles of that, especially the guy who's trying to keep the ship together, Gunther Steiner, who became something of a fan favorite after that documentary, especially given that he had to deal with a paid driver in Nikita Mazepin, who is considered by a lot of people to be the worst driver in recent history with F1. To the point where he ended up getting the nickname Mazaspin, because he kept spinning out and DNFing on every course during 1 year. But I'm using these as examples to demonstrate that
It's not the sport itself
Mhm.
that is the focus. The sport is just a vehicle for the story.
Yeah, and I know one might argue, but you're using a real sport. You're using a real sport, and these aren't real sports. To that I say, you ever been to a chess tournament or any sort of game tournament? But even with that, for the people who are playing the game in that competitive manner, it's as real to them as anything else. And
Yep.
that's not to say you treat it as uber serious, but you can't treat it like a complete joke either, unless you're outright doing a parody.
Yeah. And and I know they're like, but these are just anime games. I'd like to point out that Yu-Gi-Oh does have a world tournament that occurs annually. I have friends who go to it annually.
Yeah. Now, the per the the per as far as the point is that it is that whether or not something is depicting a real sport or a fictional sport, it's just as important. And these you talk with people who follow particular sports, whether they be real or predetermined, and it is the story is the thing that keeps them there. Sometimes for the right reasons, sometimes for the wrong reasons. Hi, Mets. Or just laughing at the teams that are ridiculously cursed.
I don't even want to think about the mess right now.
You will when July 1st comes because everybody's going to be laughing at them. As we're going to be doing every year until 2035.
Till
I'm
the
talking about
end
what
of
they did.
days.
I'm talking about what they did to us a few days ago.
Yeah, I can all I have to say to that, Coops, is the same thing Stephen A says about Cowboys. Just wait, be patient, they'll blow it.
Fair, fair.
Because you and I have to hear that thing every year from Cowboys fans about how this is going to be the year, and we're like, keep that same energy in January.
Mm.
And then January comes and and Scooter's like, I don't want to talk about it.
It's like clockwork. It's
That's
like clockwork.
it's the great joke that unites football fans and non-football fans.
Hmm.
But getting back on the rails, I think one of the big things to go with is establishing a motif to build around. In a lot of I'd say a lot of card game anime, there's kind of this line between worlds that are using future tech, but having card games that are associated with some sort of magical element. You kind of see this a lot, whether it be using magic items like in Yu-Gi-Oh, or even using some sort of magical world associated with it. I Maybe it's just me, but I think an interesting premise to build around would be to have that concept flipped. In other words, depicting a fantasy world with cards that are built on some sort of lost tech.
Hmm.
Because you in both in a lot of cases you have some sort of world where where the monsters are from.
Mm-hmm.
In some cases it's more of an implication, like early Yu-Gi-Oh. Then it was a more blatant case later, about 2/3 the way into GX, And
I am.
you kind of have the alternate world approach with Duel Masters and Bakugan, which
Well, well, then of course you also have the whole um, monsters from other worlds in Zale as well.
yeah, and the world that they take place in is one that has a lot of advanced tech, which is why I thought that flipping that on its head might be an interesting thing to explore.
A world of fantasy where the monsters come from a world of tech.
A world of tech, kind of in this, and I specifically said lost tech because what I'm considering channeling is something akin to the way the Magitech civilization works in Sword World.
Okay.
I was thinking of the lost city of Atlantis, but that works too.
Monk, with where you were going, do you know what I thought you were channeling?
What?
You care to make a guess?
I'm afraid to.
Star Ocean till the end of time.
You know what? I'll give you that.
Ha!
I'm not going to go that far. I'm not doing the whole universe is a video game kind of shit.
The whole universe is a simulation,
Yeah, I'm not doing that.
and the simulation is breaking out.
No, absolutely not.
Can't blame me for thinking that might have been the case here with these monsters, quote unquote, coming from a higher civilization.
Mm-hmm. Like I'm not doing the whole 4D concept.
Heh.
The approach now given that there's the issue of how does one create a variety of monsters that are built around tech in that sense. The approach that I'm thinking of, and there's multiple ways, but this is just one example. Is that people figured out how to bring concepts from their own imagination, their own minds into physical form. Essentially, technology that you look at science fiction, you're going to have the idea of technology creating psychics. Hell, Gundam has had that for decades with the whole new type thing, and it's even not a pioneer of that.
Yeah, I would point to the Lensman once again.
I would even go so far as to
Lensman.
point at Foundation.
I can see that, but I think Lensman popularized and pioneered it is the big thing.
Yeah, as far as the first concept of psychic in SF, my mind always comes to the mentalists that started to show up in Asimov's work, especially Empire.
I can see that. So, what you're saying is instead of everybody living in a simulation, they're simulating the monsters instead from themselves.
They're simulating the monsters. At some point, people figured out how to capture impressions of the monster the same way a painting is an impression of a scene. That became its own thing. Things end up going south, and even though you have the concept of magic in the quote unquote current time of the setting, the idea is that we're dealing with a multiple times post-apocalypse.
Oh, so now it's the cipher system. Got it.
not in terms of weird, but in terms of the apocalypse has happened, but it's been so long ago that civilizations have completely rebuilt.
Yeah, it's like the Numenera world.
Mm-hmm.
Except maybe not multiple apocalypses.
I suppose a better example that only involves one apocalypse would either be Sword World which of course we've covered extensively through the actual play, or Fragged Empire. And actually,
I think Fragged Empire, the Fragged series.
Yeah, all of them kind of have that post-apocalypse vibe.
I can see it. I think the Fragged series would probably be a good set of inspiration for that.
But would you mind giving the skinny as to what is intended by post-apocalypse, since that might be a little bit esoteric for some?
So everybody is probably familiar with post-apocalypse, where the apocalypse has happened and everybody is fighting to survive in the world as it tries to recover from the apocalypse. Being post-apocalypse essentially means that the world has, to some extent, recovered. Societies are building, economy is building, the population is starting to boom again. Things are starting to normalize, even if the face of the world and what is being done in it has changed. For example, maybe you had an apocalypse in modern our times, and the post-apocalypse is everyone scrounging through the remnants of our worlds. The post-apocalypse may not be another world of steel, glass, and concrete. We may have gone back to stone and wood, and we may have grasped some technologies in half-hearted or halting ways because we only know so much, but the rest of the technologies have receded back to that stone and wood type of era. The post-apocalypse is basically humanity has recovered to the extent that they're starting to thrive again, even if it's not in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Or in the case of Numenera, there have been so many apocalypses, thriving is just kind of weird now.
Yeah. But one reason to bring up Numenera is the concept of blurred genre lines. And this is something that I think anybody trying to adapt or do their own spin on media coming out of East Asia in general and Japan in particular has to be mindful of. As I've mentioned multiple times in the past and will mention multiple times again, you can't treat genre as if it is segregated from other genres when you're dealing with things like anime. There are there's going to be plenty of anime that are going to fit firmly in one particular genre, but there's going to be a lot of Asia plays very fast and loose with the concept of genre, so you end up having mixes that might piss off a purist, but is just standard practice there.
I'm going to use probably one of the more famous examples of this, and it's not even a shonen battle anime.
Mm-hmm.
Nichijou. Nichijou is a word that means everyday or everyday life. And it's usually about cute girls in high school doing cute things. However, one of these girls, for some reason, has a wind-up key in her back. Another girl can do wrestling moves on goats and catch paper from the air like she's a ninja. Also assaults a police officer. There are gifs and clips, I guaranteed. Anyone who has been an internet denizen long enough has seen from Nichijou. The story is, at its basic, slice of life. But it's also heavily comedy. And it's also got some interests from everywhere, from sci-fi to, well, there's actually some battle in there. Once again, refer to a probably 4'0" girl slamming a goat on the ground after spinning it in midair. And it's all...
I think there was also that whole... I remember seeing that whole gag of the principal versus deer. The battle of the century.
Yes. There are plenty of things that come in from all over. And this isn't even the first anime of this particular type, of this particular cast type, of this particular slice of life type that has done this before. Probably about 10 years before Nichijou, we had Azumanga Daioh.
I wish I were a bird.
America, yeah!
That was my shit, bro.
Like there was
You're all
there was a whole supercut parody of just taking the audio from Lord of the Rings trailers to scenes from Azumanga Daioh called Lord of the Yen.
yes, yes. Azumanga Daioh is once again cute girls in high school doing cute things, slice of life, with a bunch of comedy and other stuff that comes in. Um, Especially one girl dreaming about another girl flying using her twin tails as helicopter props. That's one of my favorite skits from Azumanga Daioh.
Or the whole thing of her taking the twin tails off, putting them in a bag, and putting a whole new pair of twin tails on.
Yeah, yeah. So as you can see, I'm using something outside of the card games just to show you how genre is not a wall in Japan. It's more of a suggestion. It gives you maybe the core ideals of what the thing is designed around, but please understand that there's a bunch of shit coming in from outside no matter what you do.
Hmm. And if I have to use a Western example, consider the Thief trilogy,
Yep, I can see it.
where it is a medieval, it is supposed to be a high medieval setting that just happens to have electricity and mecha and borderline diesel punk technologies,
I mean, if we wanted to go with a more modern thing that does the same exact thing, Dishonored.
which is kind of a successor to Thief in some ways.
That's why I said almost the same exact thing.
Yeah. The and the reason why I bring that up here is that the even though I described the setting that we'd be using as a fantasy setting, it would be one where there are some aspects of advanced tech that are present. There are some factions who are going to be more experts in it, but it is not a strictly speaking science fiction setting.
To call this, whenever we talk about it, Gestalt fantasy.
Hmm.
There's going to be a little bit of magipunk and a little bit of sci-fi and a little bit of other things, but it's primarily a fantasy world.
And the I would say that with aside from a few exceptions, most of the tech would lean into high medieval, with the advanced tech allowing for a bit of contemporariness, not too far removed from the styles of fantasy you might see the in say the fantasy settings of a lit RPG.
That could be one. I've got a really good one that's apropos for current day, though, Monk.
What?
Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Especially Tears of the Kingdom with all the Zonite stuff.
Those can certainly work, and the point is that a lot of it has the appearance and stylings of medieval, but it's not purely trying to emulate that tech level 100%.
Yeah, and especially, like I said, Sheikah and Zonite stuff, it looks in some ways archaic, but it also looks in other ways extremely advanced.
And in
It's got that
function,
nice
it is
juxtaposition.
well, the Sheikah slate in function may have an archaic look, but has is essentially not too far removed from a modern iPad in terms of its functionality.
Exactly. Except it also casts magic.
Hmm.
Let's not forget that part.
And part of the
And so that, I guess that particular juxtaposition of anachronism is what we're looking for in our world here.
yeah, in the same vein, this is how you can get from pseudo psychics to magic.
Yep.
The idea being that the principles on how things are used were ended up changing over the years, things becoming far more ritualized. I suppose one could invoke the way technology is treated in Warhammer 40K as one example, but I'm once again invoking Numenera with this kind of thing.
Hmm. Well, and then if I wanna get from pseudo psychics to magic, I'll actually use something everybody tells me is trash reading and trash watching, and I tell you all I don't give a fuck because I don't watch shit anime. The Irregular Magic High School actually describes their magic system as this: psychic force is fed through calculations to cause physical phenomena shift in the world. That's one way you can go from pseudo psychics to magic as well.
And I know that a lot of people will scream Clark's Law, but as we've talked about in the past, a lot of people forget the second half of it.
The corollary: any significantly studied magic is indistinguishable from science.
And essentially the approach we're taking here is both.
Both is good.
Yep. Oh, I'm not doing the Spanish gag because my Spanish is absolute shit.
I mean, I didn't do Spanish either.
Yeah. But this is, and because of that, there's the next question would of course be, well, how do you get the card aspect from it? You remember when I used the analogy of capturing these. I almost want to use the word imagine for it because it's too perfect of a word, but I don't want people associating this idea with Deno.
They might not associate with Deno. They might actually associate it with Blue Protocol, because the summonable monsters that you can get for your characters there are also called imagine in Japanese.
Yeah.
Who knows though?
Well, the reason why I say that's a perfect word for it is what imagine is a portmanteau of. Imagine or imagination and majin. Now, yes, majin can mean demon, but it can also mean genie.
It can literally what it means. The ma in majin usually means demonic. I mean, even maho, meaning magic, also translates to demon light. So Kuro Mahotsukai is a black demon light user, and Shiro Mahotsukai is a white demon light user. But also, well, Maho actually would mean demon waves, excuse me. Mako, as in the stuff from FF7, does mean demon light. But the Majin can mean demon person or demon god, or in this case, genie, simply because of the fact that it is a demonic and spiritual being at the same time, which genies are. Never wish from a genie, ever. And the Wishmaster movies will teach you why.
Yeah, and if you need an example of in anime of the more genie aspect, well, Majin Buu. Like, no matter what form it is clearly evoking a genie appearance. That was
with those
that and Cinderella, because the creator of Majin Buu was Bibbidi. His son is Babidi, and Majin Buu. Japanese wordplay.
It's fun. But yes, with those hammer pants that he wears, that yes, he's absolutely a genie.
I'd say Kid Boo's more of an Ifrit, which is a race of genie, but that's another story.
The Ifriti are fun. But the I mean, I understand why calling them Imagine would be fun. But you could just as easily call them something that sounds smart and futuristic, such as the Eidos. Those who don't understand quantum data don't have no idea what Eidos is, and I'm not going to explain it because that is a dissertation. But needless to say, call it the copy of quantum data of a physical object in physical life. Now, that is a vast oversimplification to the point of nearly being incorrect, but you could call it Eidos.
Yeah. especially since that's derived from idol, and a lot of
Mm-hmm.
you look at a lot of cultures, and they usually have some sort of idol that's meant to evoke something from their particular mythologies.
Mm-hmm.
And hell, you could argue that with figures in more modern mythos. I'm not saying I fully agree with it, but it's an argument that could be made.
I mean, all of the icons were certainly idols. Hello, Ghost.
Yeah. In fact, I have a bit of resentment towards Ghost because it ended up stealing an idea I was going to use for a project. That being forms based on historical figures or folktale figures. Now, if I go with that idea, everybody's gonna compare it to Ghost.
No, they're going to compare you to Fate.
I mean,
Fate was doing it a long time before Common Rider Ghost.
yeah, it's just that if I do that idea with Kamen Rider, I'm gonna get that comparison.
Oh,
But
for sure.
it's unfortunate, but it's something that I'd have to deal with.
Yep.
But so I'd like so Eidos. I'm assuming that would be spelled as IDOS, not
No,
Eidos as in
EI.
EIDOS.
EIDOS. Yeah.
So let me write that in Sacricity chat just to double
Yep.
check. So that yeah, but that's the name of that's the name of the former developers of Tomb Raider.
Yes, but they did not stay it. They did not take it from like if we're looking at the etymology of this word, monk, it comes from Greek. It means form, idea, or essence. And we're thinking of these as a form of something that was captured, an impression, like every painting is, like you said. The eidos.
Yeah, and I would say that anyone can reasonably make a personal eidos out of their own psyche. Um, sometimes multiple forms to to assist in multiple tasks, which is a way to get the partner motif that we see a lot in card game anime.
Mm-hmm.
Or in some cases a way to represent the what would be the equivalent of the ace card. But the other thing that I'd like to go with is that entering what would be card game combat implies a kind of fusion with said partner to essentially wear their psyche as an armor. And if it sounds like that's a way to do some sort of transformation motif, yes, it fucking is.
Monk. Are you just trying to do Mega Man Star Force? Because this sure as fuck sounds like Mega Man Star Force.
I haven't even played Mega Man Star Force.
I know what he's probably thinking. Digimon Frontier.
Two.
I actually like Frontier.
Frontier's great.
I know
Frontier's fire.
I know some people really hated it because it didn't do the partner setup or it wasn't as good as Tamers. If I'm being honest, Tamers was a sweet rifle, and trying to do something as good would always fail, so don't even try.
Monk, I had a confrontation with my friends in real life about Digimon Frontier in school. Like, it's so lame. I'm like, you are a lying sack of shit. I remember when we were all fucking 10 pretending that we were the Digimon. They just did it in show form. Suck a dick. Go enjoy it. Stop acting like a little shit.
And I want since you brought up Frontier, I want to point out a big reason why that one stuck with me as much as it did. I know that the problem that a lot of people have with Frontier is the fact that it didn't use the typical partner approach. I would argue that that was to its benefit because the strength that Digimon has compared to, say, Pokemon has been the mythology, has been the bigger mythos that the digital world creates, whether it be through the factions, whether it be through things like the Holy Knights, whether it be things even like the crests. That mythology has always been its best strength.
And
And
that mythology always does my boy Leomon dirty.
It's unfortunate that that happened, but the point still stands. The mythology is where its greatest strength lies, and Frontier was all about mythology.
Yeah.
And
I mean, they literally fought Lucifer at the end.
Yeah.
Oh, we're just going to fight the Morning Star, the guy who betrayed God? Why not? Wait a minute, this is Japan and anime. Of course we're going to fight God eventually.
They weren't exactly being subtle about it with them chasing a aurora called the Rose Morning Star.
Oh, I know. I picked that up when they were putting it down. I'm like, oh great, we're gonna fight Lucifer.
But the reason why I'd want to go with that whole transformation approach is that it would be a good way to separate people who are, for lack of a better term, dualists from those who just have a psyche, a IDOS that we've called.
Okay. So everybody can somehow manifest IDOS, but to be one of these battlers, you have to be able to combine with your IDOS.
Yeah. Fusion probably isn't the best word. I'd say synchro would be the best word. And the reason I'd go with that is that it's a double-edged sword. If you end up having too much mental stress or mental instability, an IDOS can go wild.
Nice. It's you've heard about having a mental breakdown and going fucking ape shit. Well, now you can, especially if your IDOS is ape.
Yeah. So I do think that a term for what would be for lack of a better term, a wild IDOS should be established.
As in
what would you call a wild IDOS in that kind of situation?
I'd call it pathos.
Pathos.
Eidos, pathos, and logos, Monk. The three triangles of how the ego works. The 3 points of the triangle of how the ego works in parts of Greek rudimentary psychology. Eidos is the thinking idea part of the man. Logos is the reasoning part of the man, and pathos is emotion. Mm-hmm. So Eidos are the things you can summon. Logos is your combination. Pathos is when it goes wild. There you go. I've just given us our motif.
Yeah. And in that same vein, because with a lot of a common motif with a lot of fantasy settings is the fact that going out into the wilderness is a dangerous affair.
Mm-hmm.
I think a way to replicate that, as well as to have our equivalent of wild monsters, is that there are certain pathos that are
unconnected to people.
Unconnected to people because they went wild over a millennia ago from whatever disaster happened in the ancient past, and they've still been around and managed to survive all that time. For lack of a better term, I would refer to these as dragon class pathos.
Okay.
Because
question for you:
mm-hmm.
Even after they've been defeated, would they continue to manifest after an amount of time has passed?
In theory, yes, but I'm going with the motif of nobody's actually been able to beat one. which is
Okay.
a way for the protagonist to have their slaying the dragon kind of moment.
Okay. Um, I am slowly connecting all these things through psychological terms in the back of my head now.
Mm-hmm.
I think instead of calling them dragon class Eidos, we should call them shadow class Eidos. Or Pathos, excuse me.
Yeah. So.
And that is to do with the fact that since these things are surviving without living minds, they must be connected to something. And if they're connected to something, that means that they have to be connected to some sort of mind. And if they're connected to some sort of mind, and we're using more psychological terms, I'm bringing in Carl Jung, the collective consciousness, and the shadow of the collective consciousness. And the pathos are connected to the shadow of the collected consciousness, the proverbial abyss in Nietzsche's oft-quoted statement.
Yeah, I will admit one of the things that put the idea of going with this concept in my head was the mobile armor that was shown in Iron-Blooded Orphans.
Do you have any idea how little that narrows it down?
That mobile armor that ended up providing the last part to create Barbatos Lupus Rex.
Okay.
And how that kind of thing was treated like a dragon hunt, essentially.
Yeah. No, I get what you're saying. I think using lots of different bits and pieces of psychology really poorly is going to piss off all the psychology bros, and I love doing that because they all have their own noses up their asses, and B is going to make anyone else who just likes exploring psychology in general giggle because it makes sense connecting it this way.
Mm-hmm. And obviously, with a lot of card games, you have not just the monsters themselves, but also the concept of, you know, things like spell effects, things like trap effects, secondary support effects for the monsters that are in combat.
Mm-hmm.
And I do the way that I think a way to circumvent that kind of motif would be that the fusion form that we have,
The logos.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Isn't hanging back, but fighting right alongside their own the other Eidos that they summon.
Okay. So now we can bring in the concept of ego, superego, and id. Because if the logos is fighting, then the ego, superego, and id of the actual person is involved in all of this. I can hear people screeching in the background. None of these concepts are supposed to combine, you dick! I'm like, heh.
Who cares?
Who cares isn't the only thing. Mine is me raising 3 middle fingers and saying, "Who's gonna stop me? You and what army?"
Because a concept that I've always found interesting, and one that'd be unexplored, is take anybody who's using any sort of deck or any sort of partner creatures or what have you. They're 9 times out of 10 a commander on the back line, the character, the tamer, what have you.
Mm-hmm.
But because of how we have this set up, it's a perfect opportunity for that same duelist, that same logos user, to be fighting right alongside the rest of the deck.
Yep. In this case, because we've already determined some stuff having to do with how the mentality of the person is affected by their fight because they're in their logos form. My suggestions for using the terms ego, superego, and id are this. Ego is the equivalent to life points in any other card game. The more damage your ego takes, the closer you are to losing the battle.
Mm-hmm.
Super ego abilities are going to enhance the Logos user directly, or his other Eidos directly, because the super ego is all about actualization of self and being higher order thought processes than just the normal crystallized center of self. And then
So these would be the equivalent of spell cards.
spell cards that affect your side of the field, yes. And then the id cards, because the id is supposed to be the underlying bestial nature of whomever is you're talking about their id, would be the equivalent of like spell cards and other utility cards that affect your opponent.
Mm-hmm.
So using a super ego move or whatever we'll call it would enhance your side or somehow or otherwise affect your side of things, and using an id move would affect the opponent in some way or shape or form.
Yeah.
That way you have two broad class categories of cards outside of your main fighting force of the Logos commander and the Eidos with him.
Mm-hmm.
Or her.
Yeah. Now, as far as the partner that's part of the fusion, that would be that in other anime that would be the equivalent of the ace card of that character.
Yeah.
Like for Yusei, that would be the equivalent of Stardust Dragon. For Yugi, that would be the equivalent of Dark Magician, and so on. But
for any of the abridged series, that would be the equivalent of card games on motorcycles.
Yeah. And I think one. So we have Eidos, which are monsters born from Psyche. We have Logos, which is the fusion form
Yep.
of their main Eidos, and one of the ironclad things that I think should be put in is that the Eidos that's used as part of the Logos process is usually the first one that they have some sort of connection with, and Eidos can change or can be adopted, which is a way that somebody could integrate a pathos into becoming a Eidos.
Yeah, I can see that. Especially since, of course, they can change. If someone's mind changes, of course, the things about that part of their mind are going to change as well.
Mm-hmm.
And since these things aren't initially manifestations of the mind, you're going to see evolution, obviously, of some sort.
Yeah, and
people change.
And when it comes to, I know somebody might say that the idea of capturing a pathos and converting it into an Eidos sounds a bit Pokemon-esque, but it's a perfect reason to go out into the wilderness for duelists, either to hunt them or to try and just overcome them.
I mean, it's also not too far removed from winning cards off your opponents,
mm-hmm.
which is a thing that happens in a lot of card game anime.
Yeah, but I wouldn't call it captured. I'd instead call it integration.
Okay, I can see that.
Is the idea much in the same way that somebody when learning a new skill will integrate it into their particular approach.
Mm-hmm.
Like if somebody's learning a way to cook, they'll figure out how the method works and then find ways to have it fit within their cooking style.
Yeah.
This is on the same principle. And it's a concept that we see a lot in wuxia. You know,
Yep.
somebody learning from a master, but they integrate a certain technique from said master into the style that they had already developed.
Yep.
And I'd say in a lot of wuxia, the master by the end of things has a bunch of different styles that they've integrated into this melting pot of the style that they've developed.
Yeah, I can see it that way.
And if I have to use a contemporary example, let's look at Goku by the end of Z.
You don't even have to look like Goku at the end of Z. You could do Goku at the end of Dragon Ball.
I mean, he had the rudimentary techniques that was taught to him by his grandfather.
Mm-hmm.
Then he integrates aspects of the turtle style from Roshi, including copying the Kamehameha.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, there's those arcs where he's just going around and trying to get life experience and integrating a bunch of techniques from that. And the at some and eventually integrating what he learns from fighting the Crane School.
Even to the point that you know, he Goku learning techniques in order to get stronger is just a trope of Dragon Ball at this point.
Yeah, and it's a trope of wuxia, and there's no and since a lot of the motifs that were pioneered in Dragon Ball are downstream from the majority of shonen battle manga we've seen over the decades, there's no reason to follow through on that.
Yeah,
or no reason not to follow through, I should say.
I knew what you meant to say.
Mm-hmm. But even though we're going with this whole idea of psychics turned mages, quote unquote, I don't want duelists to be wearing mage robes or anything like that.
I don't think they need to. I think I would think that part of it to indicate that they've reached Logos would probably be considering we're in a fantasy world and we like to do things in a dramatic way when it comes to this sort of shit. Tattoos, Monk.
I would actually be fine with that because there's one manga that I really liked that did have tattoos to represent a kind of leveling system. Beat the Vandal Buster.
Yep. Tattoos. Tattoos are a good way to stand out from a crowd no matter what part of the world you're in.
Would you have it that people who are just starting out have simpler tattoos, but somebody who has more elaborate tattoos is usually a sign of they've been dueling and winning a lot?
Not necessarily just winning, but dueling and growing.
Mm-hmm.
I think that these tattoos should indicate how someone has matured as a duelist rather than just a win-loss record. I think it'd be boring as a win-loss record, to be honest. But because, this dueling is all based on the psyche of the people doing the dueling and the eidos that they have and the eidos that they collect and maybe even the pathos as they integrate and collect as well, I imagine that part of that would be that the tattoos themselves mature based on how their psyche is maturing.
Mm-hmm.
So someone with intricate tattoos that are also, considering that these will be tied to their mindset, they'll also probably be thematically appropriate. For example, a man whose primary eidos has to do with the spring wind and the falling rain, his tattoo may evolve into a wonderful tree of flowers and petals through the breeze on him, And it may even seem to look like it's moving at times, because of course it would be. That sort of thing.
Yeah.
Whereas him starting out would probably just be a simple flower.
Yeah, I wouldn't go with the idea that they're having tattoos done the way a tattoo artist would typically do, but some sort of mark that's intentionally tied to their psyche.
Yeah, and like I said, this is just for example. I specifically evoked spring wind and falling rain because that's a thing all over wuxia, especially with swordsmen. So, and the tattoo is likely not going to look like it's been done by human hands.
Yeah, in the same vein, since we talked about the whole idea of super ego and id, would you think it'd be a good idea to have the equivalent of legendary artifacts that would be a kind of pathos? Your equivalent of some Excalibur that's hidden off in some distant cave, but can be integrated by somebody who it deems worthy.
So you're talking about ultra rare cards. Got it. Coops knows what I'm talking about with ultra rare cards, right? Coops?
Totally.
Mm-hmm.
I can hear the enthusiasm on your voice there, Coops.
I was eating, that's why.
Okay. Sorry to interrupt your meal, brother.
Yeah, but given that, and given some of the stuff that we've done in the past, I'm assuming that you would have a governing body for Logos users.
Actually think that in this case it would be more of a secret body. I think that too many kingdoms would want to too many kingdoms and other overall governing bodies would want to control Logos users, but at the same time they can't really unless they have Logos users that are stronger for obvious reasons.
I remember,
and this would.
I have an idea to suggest, because in an early draft of the Project Gaia setting that I've worked on, I had that the Magicians Guild, which was represented by the Adamantine Tower, had a set of internal laws that they referred to as the Codex. It had a more elaborate name, but everyone just calls it the Codex.
Mm.
And there are certain rules that you have to follow within the Codex, and one of them is that you cannot affiliate yourself with any sort of political organization, whether it be the leader of a tribe, whether it be a noble, whether it even be a king. You have to remain neutral on all of that, and if you violate that, then a agent known as a censor will give you a warning. And if you keep doing it, a censor might come to deal with it using the Soviet method.
They'll censor you forever.
Yes.
I think that could be a fun idea, but I was also thinking that this secret observational organization is much like the Watchers from Highlander, the TV series.
You mind giving the skinny? I know I've seen this TV series, but it's important to make sure everybody's on the same page.
So the Watchers are an organization of normal people, for the most part, who are observing the immortals and their immortal game from afar to make sure that they never become a force that could destabilize the world, is essentially their thing. They keep track of which immortals kill whom, when immortals emerged, all that sort of thing. And they would also come to immortals that they believed could help them if they felt that there was a crisis to arise. They very, very often came to Duncan MacLeod of the Clan MacLeod for help, who Why do they always get Frenchmen to play Scotsmen?
I don't know. Maybe there's a feeling that a Scottish accent would be too thick for American audiences to understand.
I actually know why. Because a lot of Scotsmen actually have French surnames. Many of the names that have the Mac in them, like MacLeod, came from French names. Or Fraser comes from fraise, which is French for strawberry.
Well, given some of the occupations that the British Isles have had over the centuries, and given the
Yep.
relationship that Scotland had with French, that actually tracks.
Yes. So them getting Frenchmen to do Scotsmen was always a wee little joke for someone like me.
Mhm.
It was great. It was great. But so the Watchers are essentially a clandestine organization. They have no official tie to any government, but they do influence governments from behind the scene as well. So that's what I'm thinking. If there is going to be an overarching organization that keeps tabs on the Logos users, they need to be this type of organization: clandestine, secretive, not tied to any one governmental power, but with enough power on their end to at least keep Logos users somewhat in check, even if that is by pitting Logos users against other Logos users.
Mm-hmm. What would the way I'm seeing it is that this is an organization that is, I would say there would be an open secret. Like, people know about them, but they know about them to a point. Like,
Well,
you might see representatives in certain settlements, but you're only going to be allowed so far in.
yeah.
Um,
We've been going on with so many psychological terms, especially those from Greek and from older psychologists. I feel we need, if we're going to have something that is supposed to be both management and sometimes opposition to our Logos users, there's only one name for them, another Greek word, pneuma, meaning the breath of spirit in people, the soul, essentially. I mean, I could have gone really blatantly Ava and called them Zele, but then you would have probably struck that down.
yeah, I would have. How was that spelled?
Pneuma.
Right. I just want to make sure I get.
I'm pretty sure
Yeah.
that's how it's spelled.
But
I'll throw it in Secricity.
But the reason why I'd say that they'd be an open secret is that they would organize things like tournaments or sanctioned duels, as well as the equivalent of requests.
Yeah.
Much like an Adventurers Guild has quest boards, or say Comstar manages the MRPC.
Yeah.
The thing is that they are very neutral, and anybody who is a Logos master is on some level associated with them. Even if they oh, thank you for the resub, Brian. Oh.
Pork chop.
Mm-hmm.
We're building a card game anime where everything is psychological terms because I like fucking with the psych majors.
But I would say that even Logos masters who have gone rogue or consider themselves independent are still being watched by Numa.
Yep.
And he says, so Freudian slip when? Actually, that'd be a good name for... A Freudian slip would be a good term for Logos users who go rogue.
I can see it. So are we gonna call the evil Logos users the Freud Society?
No, no, we're just gonna call him a slip.
Yeah, they gave Numa the slip.
Mm-mm.
That works.
Yeah, and as far as the whole, as far as I wouldn't call it, I don't like the idea of one organization that manages all of these rogues. I would much rather have it be a bunch of cells that some show up and some um are a little more subtle about things. Because having it that there's one organization that is that has evil Logos Masters or just rogue Logos Masters, I think that would create the problem that you have with Moriarty. You know, or if I have to use another example, the problem that I had with the Worm in Werewolf the Apocalypse.
I get what you're saying.
You know, when you have everything be tied to one particular villain or even a force of nature like the Worm, unless even if you're doing the absolute good and evil, you can run the risk of bottlenecking your world.
Mm-hmm.
That was the reason why you and I really didn't like the whole light and dark spirit concept when it was thrown into Avatar.
It was unnecessary.
Mm-hmm. So, plus the other reason I'd want to do that is I'd want to go with the idea that not everybody who slips is necessarily evil. Some
They
of
just
them,
don't want to be monitored.
yeah, some of them just want to do their own thing. Some of them will temporarily do it because they don't want anybody tracking them with a certain job that they're doing, or they don't want it known that they're doing it, or any number of reasons. Or in some cases, and I'm not sure what term we'd use for it. There are certain areas that would be dangerous enough to the point where if something happens to you, the Numa won't help you.
Um,
You know, in the vein of when I was in Maui, there were certain there were certain roads that if you ended up wrecking there, you'd have to pay for it because on the contract it specifically said you wouldn't drive there.
um, I mean, I don't think it really needs a name. No need to name everything, Monk.
Mm-hmm. Fair. I suppose if I had to use a video game example, consider the yagged areas in Tactics Advance.
Yep.
You know, where you don't have to deal with the whole law with all the law and anti-law bullshit, but if you lose any party members in those, you're not getting them back.
Yep. I mean, like like Numa would just tell Logos users, "Hey, we don't have any influence out there, so good luck." Because that's really what it is—a place where they lack influence.
It's a and it's not lack influence because of some politics thing. It's just that these are places that are so dangerous that they decided, nope, not worth it.
Yep.
I mean, if you're going to go in there, we're not going to stop you, but we're not going to help you either.
Yep.
And I would say that more or less settles when it comes to the world. When it comes to the cast, we usually have there's usually someone who's kind of a rookie but has some particular gift that gives them an edge early on before they start to come into their own. You definitely had that with the Millennium Puzzle in Yu-Gi-Oh! Just to use one example.
Mm-hmm.
and we've had that in some of the other building the equations where a protagonist has something that can potentially set them apart. Uh, there's potential concepts that can be worked with. I would I would say for this, one potential angle that can be done is the protagonist having a a IDOS that's either inherited or one that is unusually strong for his mind, but hasn't gone full pathos.
I don't think eidos should necessarily be inherited, especially if it's a first eidos.
Mm-hmm.
Because if it's their first eidos, it should be built solely on their psyche. So in that case, I would say that it would be an eidos that manifested much stronger than expected for whatever reason.
I suppose a good way to go about it is that our protagonist for the longest time couldn't manifest an wanted to become a Logos master, but couldn't manifest an eidos.
Mm-hmm.
Then they're put in a situation where they're in some sort of do or die setup, and end up manifesting one that is much stronger than anyone would have thought.
Because usually people have to train that sort of thing after they manifest one.
Mm-hmm. The equivalent of somebody of if most people would manifest like a level 1 fighter, this person is manifesting one that's level 12 out of 20.
Yeah.
Because a central idea is to use that more advanced IDOS as a mentor. And Brian and Porkchop points out a conflux of an item they acquired. So another possibility is that they came across a pathos that's the equivalent of our rare card equivalent, and integrated it.
Alternatively, what could have happened is the do or die situation occurs in an area of old tech.
Mm-hmm.
And the tech, because the entire thing that we determined this all arose from is that in the olden days when the tech was still intact, people would use machines to scan the eidos from their heads and manifest them, and then impression them.
Mm-hmm.
So he's in an area, something temporarily boots up for a little bit, scans his head and goes, "Hey, lots of potential, blah 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 blah. Let's manifest that." Especially considering there is a dangerous situation of such and such factor, and boom. Now, I think it's a stronger than usual eidos with some training built in because it got it from the tech before the tech finally shut all the way off.
Yeah. I'd actually say stumbling across old tech would be far more fitting of this kind of setting.
Yes. Well, I mean, the kid's looking for a chance to become a Logos user, and maybe he's read up, maybe he's a little bit of a bookworm. He's read up that the eidos and the Logos originated from the ancient civilization with all of their fantastical machines. So he went to a ruin he knows that's relatively nearby, and I say relatively because it's probably days travel away.
Mm-hmm.
But got confronted with an extremely strong pathos that was probably going to kill him. Was probably using this rundown whatever place as a lair of sorts. And one thing leads to another. Bada bing, bada boom. He gets a really strong eidos that he can combined to be a Logos Master with, that also trained him because of the information from the ancient tech.
Mm-hmm. And I will note
Well,
part of the reason that I went with the notion of the whole Logos thing is it would be a good way to integrate a variety of fighting styles. Since when I did that interview with the Perfect Draw devs, I made an allusion to treating a character's deck as akin to a fighting game character.
mm-hmm.
And I think this would be a way to just go one step further with that concept. And I would say that in discovering this, he ends up actually being able to um get his, for lack of a better term, license in Numa. And the first proverbial arc would be him being in a train in some sort of academy, some sort of training area where first timers get to learn the ropes, and developing the rivalries around that. The equivalent of Duel Academy. It's just that it would only be one arc instead of the focus for a whole series.
I think we should turn that concept on its head, though. The Eidos he has information from ancient ruins because of the scan that he got.
Mm-hmm.
What's going to happen is he's going to do pretty terribly in his classes simply because the way he does things is not the way they want him to do things, because the Eidos has told him those ways are inefficient, try these ways, they're better. So while his actual coursework suffers, any duels he's in, any tests that he has to do that are practical dueling, he aces.
I could certainly see that. And would you go with the idea that the pathos that he uses the Eidos that he uses as his partner has a lot of secrets when it comes to ancient tech that it itself has locked off?
Yes, I would even argue that part of the journey after he gets out of the academy is going to be this Eidos going, so when the machines gave me to you or manifest me from you, they also gave me a map. We need to go to these places and get new scans for new, kind of a hey, now you have some goals. Go to any of them that you want. You can have a bunch of misadventures on the way, and coming to these places will unlock more information about the ancient civilization, about how Eidos and Logos are supposed to work, etc., etc.
Mm-hmm. But the reason why I wanted to go with that idea is, remember when Shadi first tried to go into the Pharaoh's mind?
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out that it was laced with as many traps as you would expect an ancient Egyptian tomb to have.
Laced with as many traps as you would expect an ancient Egyptian pharaoh who is somehow still alive beyond the dead to do his stuff, yeah.
But it carried the implication that the pharaoh wasn't activating those traps. Those traps were subconscious.
Mm-hmm.
The essential idea being the secrets were locked off even to him.
Mm-hmm.
And going to different places is a good way to do the journey part of a hero's journey, obviously. But I would culminate that teaching arc with some form of tournament that he ends up winning, or at the very least gets in second place, if not win. Now,
I think he should win, and then one of his rivals, someone who's going to be with him for a while, is going to pull some strings and say that because he wasn't using Academy-approved methodologies, he wasn't allowed to take the championship.
So a dusty finish.
Mm-hmm. But justified this time instead of just willy-nilly because we're not Junior Land here.
I would say
Because it'd be lampshaded the entire time he's in the academy.
Mm-hmm.
He's doing terrible on coursework because he's not doing it the way they're telling him to do it. But every time he takes some sort of practical exam, he aces it.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't understand how or why. And his rival hates it. And he's probably had some run-ins with his rival trying to sabotage him and whatever. And he can't really tell them about the information from his IDOS because he's sure Numa will want to take some extra...
I'd probably have it that Numa tried to scan him,
mm-hmm.
and they got blocked off.
Mm-hmm. But he knows that if he reveals anything, Numa will take extra attention, and that would be very bad for him. Because Numa never said that they were fully altruistic as a... I mean, the Watchers were not fully altruistic in Highlander, so of course, Numa will not be fully altruistic here either.
That, and no matter what, it's a unstable element.
Yes. It may be better to just off it so that it can't fuck around the world.
Mm-hmm.
But, everything would be lampshaded, everything would be properly signposted, and so he wins the tournament. And of course he wins the tournament. But his rival, at least there in the academy, exposes that he's been using methodologies unapproved by Numa, and that the judges have decided that this disqualifies him as champion. He will be relegated to second place, and his opponent will automatically win. And his opponent doesn't even have to be his rival. It could be someone just as much deserving of getting a championship as anyone else who's just now winning because the rival's being a dickhead.
Which, in keeping with that, I'd say that even though his rival ends up winning, a lot of other people who've been around the protagonist all call BS on it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh. And I would say by the point of that tournament, he's developed a circle of friends within the academy and that same circle is willing to go with him when he decides to do the bigger journey. And are probably the only people he's shared the fact that there's more to his particular kit. Though speaking of that, there's one angle that we haven't tackled, and that is how one would integrate the whole idea of a card deck with everything else we've established. And truth be told, I honestly think that the best way to integrate the idea of cards in that manner would probably be to steal some notes from Ryuki.
You may want to extrapolate for those who would be unaware.
Obviously, Kamen Rider Ryuki came out in, I want to say that was 2002, and had its writers using card decks, which they drew and put into certain devices to create the different effects, usually with some sort of partner monster or a what was known as a contract monster in the series.
Okay.
Ryuki having that Ryuki's method using the arm brace, Knight using the sword, etc. Because as tempting as it would be to have some equivalent of a dual disc, I really don't think that'd fit.
Well, that's because I don't think that there'd be a lot of their own personal body on the line there because of the way Logos using works.
Which is why I think drawing from Ryuki, if only when it comes to the way the cards are integrated, would make the most sense.
Yes, I agree.
I had at one point thought of doing a heavily modified version of a portable cyber deck, but nah. That would just be a dual disc in all but name. And to that particular end, there's I would say those devices can take any manner of form, because when somebody makes the jump to becoming a Logos Master, they build it themselves.
Mm.
Because if there's one motif I'm a sucker for, it's crafting your own gear.
I can see it.
So even though a lot of them would have the same functionality, they all would take different forms. A lot of them would probably take the form of weapons.
Would not be surprised if that were the case.
And having one part on like the side or something to hold the deck.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
Mm-hmm. Um, but as far as the whole journey arc, of going to these different ruins to try and piece the puzzle together, that is the kind of spot where you can introduce slips.
Yeah. Introduce the rogue element in the world,
Mm-hmm.
as it were.
Especially since I'd imagine some of those ruins would be in places that are dead zones to Numa.
I could see it. It would make sense that some of the places would be beyond the reaches of their influence.
Mm-hmm. And through, but he isn't going full slip, but it's more of he's going into he's going to these areas, but also handling standard requests, which is a way to do the whole tiers and tent poles thing.
Mm-hmm.
Especially since even in the Academy arc, for lack of a better term, him and his companions would be handling small scale requests.
Yeah.
This is also a good way to use the whole integration concept to diversify his deck, for lack of a better term.
Get himself some more monsties.
Mm-hmm. Since even in something like Yu-Gi-Oh, between seasons, there's been new cards in the deck, like between Duelist Kingdom and Battle City,
Mm-hmm.
and this is just going through another form of that.
Yep.
And duel, I would say that the introduction of that journey and the world would be a good spot, as good a spot as any to steal some notes from Duelist Kingdom and Battle City, in the sense of wagering, either wagering logos or chasing certain pathos.
I mean, wagering
Wait,
Eidos,
yeah, wagering Eidos. Sorry.
because I don't think anyone would be stupid enough to wager the Eidos that is their Logos partner, since
No,
without them, well, they couldn't do it anymore.
pretty much. In fact, I'd argue that wagering the Eidos that's used for logos would be impossible.
Yeah, it wouldn't be allowed.
Wouldn't be
Not
wouldn't be allowed. Not, and when I say impossible, I mean physically impossible.
Yeah, wouldn't be allowed, and it couldn't happen anyway because, well, it's linked directly to your psyche. So, like, I assume that we could have an arc where one of the slips or one of the smaller slip organizations would be experimenting with extracting uh, Eidos used in Logos fusion by killing the users at the time of extraction or whatever.
That is one possible angle. Um,
I mean, that's just off the top of my head, but that's a typical thing that evil bad guys do.
I would say another one is an organization that figured out how to use the fusion to create their own version of doppelgangers,
Mm, that would work too.
or some or something kind of like, say, the DARs in Scryed,
Hmm.
and the process that's used to make them the alter users from the mainland kind of thing.
Yeah.
Oh, the what it ends what it so instead of them stealing, what they'd be doing is engineering certain personalities to create specific logos users.
Of course, doing that is a good way to get unstable Logos users.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword. They have a blank canvas, but the risk of instability, because this would be a very bleeding edge kind of thing.
You'd get the Beauty and the Beast unit.
Yeah, which, as an aside, I'm seeing some people argue about how face tracking is so hard, and I'm like, Kojima managed to do it back a generation ago. What's your excuse? Now 2 generations ago.
We the face tracking argument was never an argument in good faith, Monk.
No, it wasn't. It was another small violin kind of thing. But actually, the Beauty and the Beast would be something to build around, and I would even go so far as to say that one of those doppelgangers ends up switching sides. This is one of the playbooks in Perfect Draw is the turncoat. Now, somebody
Mhm.
who's a villain, somebody who was a villain, who's trying to go on this, who decides for one reason or another to switch sides.
To reform, yeah.
Hmm. It'd be a good way of introducing that, so you can have you can have the arc of someone trying to be, for lack of a better term, a real boy.
I'm a oh boy.
And I know I've been calling these artificial logos users doppelgangers, but I feel like there's a better name for them, since what they are is essentially an artificial personality.
You could call them mirrors instead. Just like how someone some executive disorders will mirror the way another person acts through mirror neuron activation due to that. They are the mirror darkly of the copy of the original Logos users that they're trying to create. After all,
Brian suggested echoes, which, if there's
also
anything
works.
that, yeah, but though I feel like the equivalent of echoes would be some form of pathos, especially Shadow Class pathos. Uh, I would say I'll go with mirror, because the idea when it comes to this turncoat is someone who wants to has started to develop their own personality quirks that weren't in the engineering,
Hmm.
and instead normally in that kind of situation they'd be captured and hit the reset button on, but they get out. You know, in Star Wars, you had the motif of a droid that's been around for long enough starts to develop their own personality quirks.
Hmm.
It's in a similar principle to this. The to the point where, because I will admit, one motif that I like using in a lot of stuff I write is the idea of somebody having two names. the name that a faction assigned them, and the name that they assigned themselves. And yes, this is me channeling my love for stuff like Orphan.
Of course.
You know, his birth name was Kurlans. They refer to it as Kurlancelot through a lot of the dub, but it's supposed to be Crisanello. But it's spelled in a weird way, so I don't really blame them.
Mm-hmm.
But the name everyone refers to him, who doesn't know him from his time in the Tower of Fangs, is Orphan. And it's used as a way to differentiate people who have that sorcerer background or sorcerer adjacent background and those who don't. Or even those who know what a stabber is, which in that setting was basically a magic assassin. Hence the name Sorceress Stabber Orphan. But the mirror in this kind of situation would be someone who had a particular name that was associated with them. And when they started to develop their own personality that wasn't approved, they end up taking a new name for themselves. Now, what that name isn't important. The important part is that it's a name that they chose as a way of saying, I am me. I'm not just another cog. Am I making sense?
Yeah.
And as far as what information is revealed in those ruins, I'm not sure if I'd go with it showing an explanation of what happened during the ancient times, but more that that not only did something happen, but that some people who are messing around, some people like the villain faction we'd use, are messing around with tech that they really shouldn't. And if they keep messing around with it, then they're going to play with the same stuff that wrecked the old civilization.
Especially since they have less understanding of it than the old civilization did.
Mm-hmm. And that's a good way to get the party to directly confront whatever slip organization is being used here.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as the playbooks, if I was to do this in Perfect Draw, there's a myriad of ways. The reason why I haven't focused on the cast individually is because because that's something that could be handled just through looking at the playbooks that Perfect Draw has as a template to build around. And as far as individual logos or not logos, eidos or pathos having motifs that would be limited to, say, fantasy creatures, I wouldn't even do that. The reason we went with the idea of manifest from the psyche is so that you can literally have it be just about anything, the same way that monsters in an existing card game can be just about anything.
Mm-hmm.
But if someone were to replicate this into a full-on card game, I would say that you would have three phases. Obviously draw the for lack of a better term, commander action. In this case, the logos action, which is where you would do things like superego and id effects. And then the combat phase, which the logos would always be an option to take a part in. The idea being, logos are going to be more durable than Eidos are, but Eidos can always come back.
Yeah.
I'm kind of drawing upon how stunned and KO worked in versus system. Like winning
Mhm.
combat in versus system just stunned that particular enemy. But you could always certain cards could bring them back from stun, and at the end of a round there would always be one stunned card that you could bring back, and the rest would be KO'd. As that's how I remember it. Don't take that with a grain of salt. But the point is, much like how there's time to come back, a recovery time when getting taken out in an arena shooter, it's in the same principle when it comes to the way IDOS work.
Mm.
The rule would be the more that if they're taken out, it's on a cooldown, and the more powerful ones are of course more powerful, but they have bigger cooldowns. And of course that same fusion effect could be used as a kind of stacking to replicate, the whole sacrificing existing monsters for bigger ones.
I don't think we'd necessarily need to do that because that's fairly specific to Yu-Gi-Oh.
How instead would you handle the idea of escalating the monster equivalents?
So the real question is, would there be a need to?
Actually, I think I've come to realize there's a perfect answer. LP thresholds. The lower your LP is, the stronger ones that you can bring out.
Mm. So the more ego damage you have, the stronger monsters you can do.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Kind of how a bigger threat creates a bigger fight or flight effect.
Yeah, I can see that.
Because there is that theme of escalation in a lot of works in this particular subgenre. Sometimes this is handled through sacrificing, sometimes through some sort of resource, sometimes both. But I think with the fact that we already have ego and the idea of ego damage, we can kill two birds with one stone.
Yeah.
So so in that regard, a companion to ego would be threat level. At the start, threat level is 0. At the near the end, threat level would be much higher. And the threat level determines what sort of IDOS can be brought out.
At least in official matches.
Mm-hmm. Unofficial, it's a case of everything goes because unofficial would be the equivalent of, say, fighting Pathos or Shadow Class Pathos.
Mm-hmm.
And if I was designing them in encounter forms, Pathos would always be a step above you. Shadow Class Pathos would be the equivalent of a raid boss. In other words, you can't. It's even if you taking on a Shadow Class Pathos by yourself would be extremely difficult, and even with a group, it would still be a challenge.
Yeah.
Because I mean, yes, if you're yes in an MMO, if somebody's over leveled, they could take a raid boss by themselves. But for the most part, it's a bad idea to do that. And the idea being that the reason why people don't just go out and en masse try and find Pathos is the fact that even what would be considered a low level Pathos can still be a threat if you're not prepared. because even a low level is still going to be somewhat stronger than a normal Logos user.
Yeah.
Uh, which is as good of a reason to have to encourage dealing with Pathos or even Shadow Class in groups. Therefore, you have a reason to get everybody to get whole parties involved in dealing with them. And in doing so, you end up sidestepping the duet problem.
Mm.
And I know I said that, but having having it that the protagonist was able to take on a Pathos by themselves is a good way to demonstrate the abnormal nature of that protagonist. And I know I brought up Star Wars when it comes to referencing the hero's journey, but consider the trench run when it comes to the Death Star. You know, everybody tries the normal method of hitting that exhaust port, and they all miss. And it's only when Luke tries an unorthodox method, i.e., using the Force, that he's able to hit it. It's not exactly a 1-to-1, but it's in a similar ballpark as far as the principle.
Mm-hmm.
Because you kind of hinted at that earlier, that when he tries the expected method that's established at the academy, he fails. But whenever he has to do something a bit more practical of an exam, he passes with flying colors every time.
Yeah.
It's in that same because we've had characters throughout media that are that kind of street smart over book smart. In fact, that'd be a good dichotomy to use with the protagonist and the rival. The rival is a very book smart, very by the book, stiff neck kind of individual, whereas the protagonist is a play it by ear kind of approach.
He's intuitive.
Yeah, which in a lot of those pairings, the conflict is the fact that the person who's book smart believes that they know how things are supposed to work, and somebody who's street smart pretty much laughs in the face of that concept, which creates conflict. Like, I mean, with Yu-Gi-Oh, you had the whole thing with Kaiba, going through all of this different analysis of the duel he had with Yugi to try and figure out why he lost. That according to every statistical measure, he should have won that battle.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it should have been statistically impossible for him to have all the pieces of Exodia
In his hand. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But he believed in the spleen of the cards.
Yeah. And the takeaway from that is that maybe there is something more to this that he doesn't quite understand, which put Kaiba on his particular journey.
And then Kaiba found out he was always under Yugi. Or at least, his ancient Egyptian self was always under Yugi's ancient Egyptian self.
Yeah, that's a whole other matter, but the point still stands.
Mm-hmm.
The book smart archetypes ends up being humbled and is trying to figure out why the methods that they had always relied on didn't work.
Yeah.
And usually in the process they end up discovering something that does. at the very least understand that that the world is more complicated than than the glorified math problem that they'd been seeing it as.
Mm.
Admittedly, Kaiba's denial throughout Yu-Gi-Oh for the longest time about the presence of the supernatural got a bit comical at points, but the point still stands.
I mean, presence of the magical and the supernatural in his life wasn't as pronounced as it was in Yugi's, so it kind of made sense that he was skeptical for the longest time.
Mm-hmm. Skeptical, but it did stretch credulity.
At certain places, yes.
Mm-hmm. But I would say that anyone that when it comes to designing the, for lack of a better term, deck, that it's important to think less on optimization and more on theme.
Yeah.
Because if you look at a lot of the decks in characters, in whether it be Yu-Gi-Oh or otherwise, then there's usually some sort of theme, and that theme usually ties into their particular character.
Except if it's the main character. The only thing that Yugi ever kept with him was basically the Dark Magician. Let's be real here.
Yeah, it was all over the place, but I suppose a better example would actually be Yusei.
Yes, Yusei's deck was extremely thematic.
Based a lot on the idea of weaponized junk, or cards that people would normally think just weren't worth it, but he finds a way to make them worth it.
And anytime they aren't made worth it, he just pulls out the Stardust Dragon and everything's fine.
Mm-hmm.
How many times did the Stardust Dragon save him? Way too many.
Yeah, but it ties back into that whole idea of building around a theme. And a lot of the example decks that are shown in, say, Perfect Draw do that precisely.
Okay. I think we got a pretty good foundation for this thing.
Yeah.
We got our character. We got the ideas of how this world works with its card game, or equivalent thereof. Mm-hmm. We've even got most of his story plotted out, as we tend to do.
Yeah, I would say if I was using the playbooks from Perfect Draw, the protagonist would most certainly be the Destined, because that's kind of that's the one that fits the most.
I mean, a lot of heroes' journeys start with someone who is destined.
Mm-hmm. I know that some people have this, for whatever reason, hate boner for the idea of the chosen one motif. Or in some cases, you have the bad actors who say that chosen ones are just Mary Sue's, as a way, which is, I say is bad actor because because the real intent is to say that the actual Mary Sue is not as bad, or pulls some sort of tu quoque.
Yeah, or Bot and Melee.
Mm-hmm. Mott and Bailey.
No, I said it that way on purpose, Monk. Bot and Melee. Come on now.
Fine.
You know that was on purpose.
But that is a case of only looking at the surface level. Because if you look at a lot of the chosen one narratives, they screw up a lot.
I mean, failure is part of the learning process.
I mean, since I've been using the reason I keep using Star Wars is it's an easy use of the hero's journey that everybody has seen or knows about the mythos in some form.
Yep.
Because what happened Because let's consider this. After the whole going full circle um with a New Hope, you have things go tits up repeatedly in Empire Strikes Back. The whole thing with the base getting routed because of one rogue droid that got blown up. Him almost getting killed by a Yeti. And
Wampa.
it's a Yeti in all but name, but yeah.
But let's use proper names here, monk.
Fine, Wampa. You happy?
Thank you. Yes. Thank you.
And of course, he thought that because he had some manner of training from Yoda, which he ended up bailing because he was focused more on his friends, he was disarmed and had his world completely shattered because of the fact that he thought he was avenging his father, and it turns out that wasn't the case. Yes, we all know the scene, but the point that I'm getting at is that if he was really a Mary Sue, none of that would have happened. Because there were a bunch of people saying that Luke was a Mary Sue to try and when people were saying that Rey was, which she is,
Rey is a Mary Sue.
much in the same way that Korra is a Mary Sue.
No, they're Mary Sues in different ways. Rey is a Mary Sue because nothing. She had no hardship. Korra was a Mary Sue initially because she had no hardship, and then she had all of the hardship. It was torture porn.
Yeah. In a way,
Also,
in a
I'm
way
gonna
to
be
have some magic bullet.
I'm going to be perfectly honest here. It was between seasons 3 and 4 it was at the end of season 3 that she got poisoned, right? Book 3, or was it book 2?
No, it was book 3, because that was where they did the whole Red Lotus that I kept making Bane jokes about.
Yeah. The reason I bring this up is because they poisoned her with liquid mercury. She would be dead. Heavy metal poisoning would have had her dead in days.
And then
No, she took months to bend it out of her system. No, fuck you. She would have been dead before she could do it.
And then tried to go with the reason you can't connect with Rava is because not all of the poison was taken out.
Fucking stupid. I fucking hate that. That's fucking stupid. I fucking hate that.
When, as I mentioned, when we did that reconstruction, there was a perfect opportunity to do the one last ride with season 4 of her understanding that she's on borrowed time.
Yeah, but we didn't do that because we're better.
We didn't do that because we didn't even do the poisoning thing because we didn't need to.
Yeah, like I said, we didn't do that because we're better.
But getting back to this, the
Destined.
Yeah.
He'd be the Destined playbook.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And as far as the mirror that we mentioned, that would be the turncoat. Although one could I should go through the list of playbooks because it does provide a good list of archetypes to build around. And you can, and when I give you the description of each, you can tell me if there's a character concept that you think would fit.
Okay.
So the first is the ally. The people around you seem so focused on card games, but life's got more to offer than that alone. You've got a career, hobbies, friends, so you'll strike a healthy balance to aid how you can from the sidelines and follow your heart through it all.
I mean, that can be literally any member of Numa that is not a Logos user and acts as, support staff, much like Watchers did to Immortals.
Mm-hmm. The Destined, I'm skipping that. We've already answered that. The Glowing, something about you pulls people together. Maybe it's your unique skills or your general sociability. Either way, people gravitate towards you. While you might not be able to push forward by yourself, you can with the help of others.
I don't really see somebody like that being around our MC, to be honest.
Examples that are example archetypes that are given are Rockstar who plays card games, Beacon of Friendship, Empathetic Friend. I think when I asked for an example, one of the devs brought up Anzu.
Yeah, but like I said, I don't think there's going to be somebody like that around our MC, mostly due to the fact that the rival is constantly trying to hound him, which probably makes other people avoid him just so they don't also get in the sights of the rival, and also because he kind of keeps to himself since he's consulting with his Eidos, who has ancient information.
I could see it being somebody who's a friend who's more of the conscience, but that's as far as I'd go.
Mm-hmm.
But next is the idealist. Many people drift through life without something to truly believe in, but not you. There's something you care deeply about, a dream you'll strive for and fight for. While not everyone is like you, there are those who maybe you can convince.
Um, I mean, there might be someone in Numa like that, but with what we've developed here, this very much seems like mostly a solo journey for our MC.
Yeah. I would say a way to integrate the idealist would be someone who believes that there's something more to what happened all the years ago. Who is trying to uncover that. Some sort of archaeologist archetype.
Okay, I can see that.
The medium. You are blessed and cursed with a unique power, something that makes you stand out in a supernatural way. Your power, whether you like it or not, has shaped your life to this moment, and most certainly will shape it again in the future.
I guarantee there's someone in the higher ups of Numa like that.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a few slips like that are like that as well.
Yeah. The prodigy. The fact of the matter is, you're just the best there is. Anyone who denies it is either too ignorant or too headstrong for their own good.
Hi, rival.
Yep. Yep.
That's Seto Kaiba right there.
Mm-hmm. The resolved. No matter the obstacles you face, you have the determination and the gumption to overcome them. Learning from your friends every step of the way and never accepting a loss as the final step. You're sure to become the best there ever was. Eventually. Jonoichi is what the resolved is.
I know that's Joey.
And I'd honestly say any friendly rival at the academy, not full on rival, but somebody who
they get along.
You know the old motif of a couple of people who get in a Pier 6 brawl and then go out for drinks.
Yep.
That's the motif I'm thinking of.
Mm-hmm.
Like they butted heads early on. They will still butt heads, but it's more of butting heads the way siblings butt heads.
Yeah.
Like, I like you, but you're still a dick. Oh.
Yeah, it's us. I know.
The rogue. You've always got a trick up your sleeve, and you never leave home without a backup plan. Your mission may seem impossible, but you're smart. You know you can overcome any challenge that comes your way with expertise and finesse.
I think this guy's going to be the rival's like left hand.
I would say either. I'd say this would be a good way to have a slip who's independent.
That too. That could work as well.
Because I've always seen the rogue as someone who he might. I could easily see him being the left hand for the rival until he decides to turn on said rival.
It's Gambit.
Mon ami.
Ma chère.
The spirit. On a fundamental level, you're not quite like everyone else that inhabits this world. You're special. Whereas they might be made of flesh and bones, you differ, composed of data, thought, magic, or something else unique from humanity.
That's the main character's main Eidos for Logos combination.
Yeah. And the last would be the turncoat, but we already established that would be the mirror.
That Pork Chop wants to name Alice for Looking Glass reasons.
he was also suggesting the idea of having villain factions themed around cards.
Yeah, because the Court of Cards.
Mm-hmm.
Fridge thought for everybody. Why does the Queen of Hearts have all four suits of cards as her soldiers? Where are the Queen of Diamonds, Spades, and Clubs?
I would be
Off with their head.
I would be I would actually go with the idea if I'm gonna be using cards. I think it would be interesting to not use a playing card deck motif, but use mirrors as the minor arcana.
I mean, it'd still be 54 of them.
50 essentially 50 essentially each of the cards is
56, excuse me.
Is one model.
Yeah, 56. I counted that wrong. There's 14 cards per suit in the Major Arcana.
Mm-hmm.
Because you have 4 court cards. Knave, Knight, Queen, and King.
Yeah. And I'd actually say the mirror who ends up being a turncoat. I want to say this would be the equivalent of the Knight of Swords.
You made me want to start singing Motorhead, though, Monk.
Why not?
The Ace of Spades. The Ace of Spades.
Especially, well, let's not forget that the Ace of Spades is associated with death.
The one, yep, and the Ace of Swords,
mm-hmm.
also associated with death. But yeah, the Knight of Swords sounds good too.
Mm-hmm. Especially since you can have that its particular slate of Eidos, which I am using slate as the name for the name equivalent for a deck.
Okay, that makes sense.
Is themed entirely around different forms of knights or their equivalent.
Okay. Hey, a monk, you just inspired me. Instead of mirror, which seems like a very plain name, I'll be honest. I've got a better name. Tabula rasa. The blank slates.
So
it's perfect.
Yeah, I can go with that.
Yeah. So these copy people, the ones that they're making artificial Eidos by making copied personalities, they're originally inscribing these on blank slates, the tabula rasa.
Yeah, the idea that I have is that as far as the process is, they would capture a civilian, and then put them through this treatment using the ancient tech that they've been able to repurpose for this. And that once the personality has been established, they end up using other tech to change their physical appearance.
Yeah. But the point remains that rather than just calling them something a little mundane like the mirrors, calling them the tabula rasa just sounds cooler. I am rule of cooling for this because fuck you, that's why. Everybody else who might be complaining, I don't give a shit.
But the other reason to go with this angle is, you remember how in Battlestar Galactica there was the motif of there are only 12 Cylon models?
Yeah.
It's in the same vein. There are each card in the minor arcana is one personality model.
So there's 14 for each suit.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's 14 for each suit, and not only are the IDOS that they use this more or less the same, the logos they use is more or less the same, and this also means that the tabula rasa who ends up going rogue mostly has the same look as something of that model, but ends up changing it. Like say the model appears to have say long blonde hair, and when they end up going turncoat, they do a haircut and dye their hair or parts of their hair a different color.
I could see that.
You know, the central idea is that they are trying to establish their own identity and not just the identity that was made for them.
Yeah, they're differentiating.
Mm-hmm. Now, as far as whether or not they'd be able to undo the physical changes and get back to their original body, that part would be irreversible. Because, especially since by the time that they do a turncoat, they've been in this changed body for years.
Mm-hmm.
You could say that they were converted when they were very young, and they've grown up in that new form. So there would be no way to change them back. In other words, there's no going back to who you were, but you can make something new.
There's no going back to who you were, but you can choose who you are.
Mm-hmm.
Very old proverb.
Brian says that a minor arcana going rogue could be called a reverse. I'm a bit hesitant about that because that's not the motif that I'm going with. Like the minor arcana are just used as a naming designation for each of the models. So it's not really doing the normal and reverse the way the tarot would normally work.
Yep. They don't really need a name, though. I mean, whatever slip organization has created them can just say, the Knight of Swords has gone rogue.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe one of their Cruder members can go, maybe we should have made him the Knave instead. And somebody slaps him over the head.
He'd probably take the name Knave just to own the fact that he doesn't work with them anymore.
Yeah, just Knave in general, not even Knave of Swords.
I just realized what would be a perfect parallel to this concept of a servant going on their own and switching sides and changing their appearance as a process. Blade Wolf.
Oh. You're your own master now?
Yep. I mean, you have the way he looked with the chainsaw and all that, and then after getting his ass kicked and changing sides, he gets a whole new appearance.
Yeah, and he's dummy thick. I am going to make that Maxor joke every time Blade Wolf is brought up. Because Blade Wolf has the whole fucking cake factory.
Yeah. Now, I know I've referenced Perfect Draw a lot here, but that's because it does provide a very good framework to build around. Even if the card game combat that it's going with is leaning more into traditional affairs than what we're doing, it is designed to not lean into one particular setup too much, because it is narrative focused.
What we're doing kind of reflects parts of Battle City where getting hit and having your life points drained would actually hurt you.
Mm-hmm.
How did Kaiba not get arrested on an international level for that? I might add. Oh yeah, by the way, if you lose life points, you actually get hurt. There is no fucking legal organization in the world that would allow that, no matter how much money the man has.
Oh, for that matter, how did I'm pretty sure he doesn't have a pilot's license for his fucking jet.
That's not a jet, Monk. It's an abomination.
I mean, at the very, not to mention, there's, he says, didn't he own Domino City? No, he didn't.
Or if he did, that's violating international laws at that point. But you know what? Rails.
Yeah.
At least with rails, we can get away from that abomination of a jet, because he can't use it on the fucking rails.
But there is a small part of me that would like to do a mini arc involving logos that specifically use some sort of conveyance to go around places, so we can have our card games on motorcycles.
Of course. Like, don't get me wrong, I love 5Ds, but holy shit. The idea that they generate energy by having card games on motorcycles is fucking ridiculous.
No more ridiculous than anything else. So I'm just saying,
I am more willing to accept Egyptian magic than that. I am more willing to accept that I can summon God with a card that has him shown as a giant chicken than fucking we use card games on motorcycles to somehow generate more energy than nuclear power plants.
Well, let's be honest. 5Ds was a case of okay. We already did. We can't do what we did before, so fuck it.
Oh, I know. 5Ds, it perfectly owns its ludicrousness, and I love it for that. But holy shit.
And I still imagine that much like what Foxcade brought up, that somebody at the meeting room said, so if we're doing motorcycles, are we doing the Akira slide? Yes, we're doing the Akira slide. We are men, not animals. Look, it's part of the rules. If you're dealing with motorcycles in anime, you have to do the Akira slide. I don't make the rules.
Porkchop says, fuck it, card games on trains. My response, multi-track drifting.
There is a roguelike called we technically have duels on top of trains, like during the Orichalcos arc.
Orichalcos.
And we did, and
I may have a bone to pick with Karibo about pulling up the ladder behind him, but Orichalcos is never a bad joke. Orichalcos.
But as far, if you were to give this particular series, this particular setting a title, what would you call it, given everything that we've set up here?
Don't say the name I want to say. Don't say the name I want to say. Don't say the name I want to say. Don't say the name that'll make Yoshiyuki Tomino sue us. Joke name brain powered. Nobody gets that joke but Monk, because nobody but Monk and I have watched Brain Powered. It's actually a decent mecha show. I would highly recommend that anybody who likes mecha watch it, because it's pretty good. Let me think. The Noosphere. Noosphere.
And I'm guessing you'd integrate the title in the fact that the big mystery is around that.
Yeah. Like, because the noosphere, for anyone who doesn't know what the noosphere is, it is a philosophy of Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, a state of interconnected awareness amongst all minds, postulated as resulting from humanity's biological and cultural evolution, or collective consciousness caused by humans evolving into the state of where they are now, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
I like the idea of calling this show Noosphere just because of that.
That, and I know some might say, isn't that akin to the metaverse? If we called it that, there'd be a bunch of people getting the wrong idea because that word has been so damn tainted.
Mm-hmm.
But I could easily see that, and I could easily see designing this around Perfect Draw as a campaign setting, although with one that is going to involve some house ruling, just because of some of the mechanics that we're proposing in this that wouldn't quite fit within within some aspects of Perfect Draw's mechanics.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd say that more or less covers how this kind of thing could be handled.
Yeah.
So that is going to do it for this particular episode. Um, Now something I will note. Um, I will not be doing GeekWatch on Sunday the 21st because that's going to be a pay-per-view night. Dynasty. So I'm going to be watching that, and pulling double duty on that kind of thing is a problem. And we will be back on the 28th, though I may be a little bit late because I'm going to be at DaveCon that week. Unless something changes, in which case it's going to be um, everything as normal.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, as far I do have an interview tomorrow morning regarding a game abbreviated as Saki, or Sorcerers, Adventurers, Kings, and Economics. I have to do it in the morning because time zones.
Mm.
Even though the Kickstarter says the location is Middletown, the actual location is not that.
Yep.
On Tuesday, Hirondetsu, who actually reached out to me about covering his project, will be in the temple. Wednesday, Joe Frederick will be in for his particular project. Um, some of you may recall that I had him on some time ago when it came to Dead of Night. He's now working on a spy comedy game called Agents of Fate, which is very much channeling the Man Who Knew Too Little,
Mm-hmm.
with an art style that is reminiscent of The World Ends With You.
Nice.
At least that's the vibe I get just looking at the various art that's been put up for it. Thursday, Monarch and I will be starting our journey through Cursebrand Chronicles, which is a very interesting game and also a very free game. So I will hear no excuse about there not being alternatives out there. And Friday, I will be doing an interview with Vincent over his upcoming board game called Truck Coon, which yes is all about sending people to get isekai'd.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and of course, later that same day, you and I will be going into the quick start for Astro Inferno.
Yes.
Um, Saturday, of course, will be Cloister the Dice, and after that, I'm gonna be doing an interview with Richard Kelly, the same guy behind Overwar, who's doing a horror brawling card-based TTRPG called Deadbeats that is heavily inspired by Devil May Cry. So that's checking all my boxes. Beyond that, before 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 that, just because I'm not doing GeekWatch on Sunday doesn't mean I'm not doing anything on Sunday. Because Sunday afternoon, I'm going to be doing a collab with a VTuber, Theodore Locus, who briefly showed up during one of our monastic therapy streams in the comments. Him and I are going to be doing a discussion about Japanese TTRPGs and sharing our respective experiences when it comes to it. I have to do it at noon because he's on Moscow time.
I see.
I know I keep saying that I hate time zones, but I do.
He can't get away from the time zones, though. They haunt him forevermore.
Much as I would like to only have to deal with Central Time and that's it, I know that that's not feasible. And of course, as I hinted at before, the Cloister episode on the 20th, on Saturday, that is going to be delving into something that I've been prepping since we started the Sword World campaign. Everything else was kind of a warm-up, and even though last week's went very quickly, I kind of had to do it to set up some of the things to come.
Yep.
I didn't have to, but it was a good way to get people to go further north.
We're gonna have some fun.
But that is a story for another night. So until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra, I am your gaming monk, and join the watch.
Sure.